The morning sun cast golden rays across the small town of Cedar Falls, Minnesota, painting the quiet streets with the warmth of a late September day. The leaves had just begun their transformation, hints of orange and red appearing among the green canopy that lined Maple Avenue, the town's main thoroughfare. It was the kind of morning that made people slow down, take a deep breath, and appreciate the simple beauty of small-town life. A gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn, fallen leaves, wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the faint sweetness of apples ripening in backyard orchards. 7-year-old Tommy Mitchell sat on the weathered wooden steps of his front porch, his chin resting in his small hands as he watched the world wake up around him. His brown hair was tousled from sleep, and his pajamas, covered in cartoon dinosaurs, were wrinkled from a restless night. But none of that mattered to Tommy. What mattered was the small, scruffy terrier mix curled up beside him, a dog with patches of white and brown fur and eyes that seemed to hold an entire universe of loyalty and love. The morning light caught the grey around Biscuit's muzzle, a gentle reminder that the dog who had been Tommy's constant companion was growing older, though his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. "You're the best dog in the whole world, Biscuit," Tommy whispered, running his fingers through the dog's wiry coat. "Did you know that? You're better than any superhero, better than anyone." Biscuit's tail thumped against the wooden planks, a rhythmic sound that had become the soundtrack of Tommy's young life. The dog had been part of the family for as long as Tommy could remember, a gift from his grandfather on Tommy's first birthday, back when Biscuit was just a tiny puppy with oversized paws and ears that flopped in opposite directions. Grandpa Joe had passed away 2 years after that, but Biscuit remained, a living bridge to memories Tommy was too young to fully recall, but felt deeply in his heart. The screen door creaked open behind them, and Sarah Mitchell stepped out onto the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. At 34, Sarah carried the gentle weariness of a single mother doing her best to hold everything together. Her husband, David, had passed away 3 years ago in a car accident, leaving her to raise Tommy alone in the house they had planned to fill with laughter and more children. The lines around her eyes had deepened since then, but so had her strength, her determination to give Tommy the childhood he deserved, despite everything they had lost. "You're up early, sweetheart," Sarah said, settling into the old rocking chair that had belonged to her grandmother. "Couldn't sleep?" Tommy shook his head without looking up from Biscuit. "I had a bad dream." Sarah's heart tightened in her chest. Tommy had been having nightmares more frequently lately, something his therapist said was normal for children processing grief, even years after a loss. "Want to tell me about it?" Biscuit was gone, Tommy said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find him, and I was all alone." Sarah set down her coffee and moved to sit beside her son on the steps, wrapping her arm around his small shoulders. "Biscuit isn't going anywhere, baby. He loves you too much to ever leave." As if understanding every word, Biscuit lifted his head and licked Tommy's cheek, his tail wagging even faster. Tommy giggled despite his lingering worry, the sound bright and clear in the morning air. Across the street, old Mr. Henderson was already tending to his garden, his straw hat bobbing as he bent to inspect his prized tomato plants. He looked up and waved at the Mitchell family, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. Cedar Falls was that kind of town, where neighbors knew each other's names, where children played freely in the streets until the streetlights flickered on, where the local diner still served coffee for $1 and the same families had lived for generations. But beneath the idyllic surface, Cedar Falls was struggling. The economic downturn had hit hard, and the local factory, the town's main employer for decades, had announced plans to close by the end of the year. Families were leaving, businesses were shuttering, and the sense of community that had always defined the town was beginning to fray at the edges. At the Cedar Falls Fire Department, housed in a red brick building that had stood since 1952, Captain Marcus Williams was conducting the morning briefing with his crew. At 47, Marcus had spent his entire adult life serving the community he loved. His father had been a firefighter, and his grandfather before him. The Williams family name was synonymous with the fire department, their history intertwined with every major event in the town's collective memory. "All right, listen up," Marcus said, his deep voice commanding attention without effort. "We've got the annual fire safety program at the elementary school this afternoon. Johnson, you're on the presentation. Rodriguez, you're handling the equipment demonstration. And remember, these are kids. Keep it educational but fun." Lieutenant Jake Johnson, a broad-shouldered man in his early 30s with a quick smile and kind eyes, nodded eagerly. "I've been practicing my smoke alarm song, Captain." The other firefighters groaned good-naturedly, and even Marcus couldn't suppress a smile. Jake was known for his terrible singing voice, but his enormous heart, especially when it came to the children of Cedar Falls. He had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, until he aged out of the system at 18. The fire department had become his family, and he treated every call like a chance to give back to the community that had finally accepted him. "Please, no singing," groaned Maria Rodriguez, a petite woman with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had joined the department 5 years ago, one of only 2 women on the team, and had quickly proven herself to be one of the most capable firefighters in the county. "The kids will have nightmares." "Hey, my voice isn't that bad," Jake protested, though his grin suggested he knew exactly how bad it was. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of station life: equipment checks, training exercises, paperwork that seemed to multiply no matter how much they completed. But there was an underlying tension that nobody mentioned aloud. The town's financial troubles had reached the fire department too. Rumors of budget cuts and potential layoffs had been circulating for weeks, and the uncertainty hung over them like a storm cloud refusing to break. Marcus retreated to his office after lunch, staring at the budget projections spread across his desk. The numbers were brutal. Without additional funding, they would have to cut staff or reduce services. Either option felt like a betrayal of everything his family had built over 3 generations. A knock on his door interrupted his grim thoughts. It was Ben Torres, the youngest member of the team at 23, fresh out of the academy and still carrying the wide-eyed enthusiasm that experience would eventually temper. "Captain, the school called. They want to confirm we're still coming at 2 o'clock. Marcus nodded, pushing the papers aside. "Tell them we'll be there. And Ben, you're coming too. It's important for the kids to see young firefighters. Gives them hope." At Cedar Falls Elementary School, Tommy Mitchell sat at his desk in Mrs. Patterson's second-grade classroom, his attention drifting between the math worksheet in front of him and the window overlooking the playground. He could see the fire station from here, its tower rising above the surrounding buildings like a beacon of safety. "Tommy, can you tell me what 6 + 7 equals?" Tommy's attention snapped back to Mrs. Patterson, a patient woman in her 50s who had been teaching in Cedar Falls long enough to have educated the parents of some of her current students. Her eyes were kind behind her reading glasses, and she never seemed to get frustrated, no matter how many times she had to repeat herself. 13, Tommy answered, though it came out more like a question. "That's right. Good job." Mrs. Patterson smiled and moved on to the next student. Tommy's best friend, a freckled girl named Emma Chen, leaned over from the adjacent desk. "I heard the firefighters are coming today," she whispered excitedly. "My mum says they let you climb on the truck sometimes." Tommy's eyes lit up. He had always been fascinated by firefighters, by their bravery and their shiny trucks and their ability to help people on the worst days of their lives. Sometimes, late at night, he would imagine his dad as a firefighter, saving people from burning buildings, coming home to tell stories of heroism and courage. It helped him remember his father as something more than a fading photograph on the mantel. The afternoon assembly was held in the gymnasium, where folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a small stage. The children filed in with barely contained excitement, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling until the teachers managed to settle them down. When the firefighters walked in, Tommy felt his breath catch in his chest. They were wearing their full gear, helmets tucked under their arms, boots polished to a shine. Captain Williams led the way, followed by Lieutenant Johnson, Officer Rodriguez, and the young rookie Ben Torres. They looked like superheroes from the movies Tommy watched on rainy Saturday afternoons. "Good afternoon, everyone," Captain Williams began, his voice filling the gymnasium without effort. "My name is Captain Marcus Williams, and these are my colleagues from the Cedar Falls Fire Department. We're here today to talk to you about fire safety, but more importantly, we're here to answer any questions you might have about what we do." The presentation was engaging and informative, covering everything from the importance of smoke alarms to the proper way to stop, drop, and roll. Jake Johnson did in fact sing his smoke alarm song, and despite Maria's predictions, the children seemed to love it, clapping along and giggling at his exaggerated gestures. But it was what happened after the formal presentation that would set the events of the coming days into motion. The children were allowed to approach the fire truck parked outside, to climb into the driver's seat and try on helmets that swallowed their small heads. Tommy hung back at first, watching his classmates with a mixture of longing and shyness. He wanted to participate, to feel what it was like to sit where the heroes sat, but something held him back. Captain Williams noticed the small boy standing apart from the others. Something in Tommy's expression, a sadness that seemed too heavy for such young shoulders, drew Marcus toward him. "Hey there," Marcus said, crouching down to Tommy's eye level. "Not interested in the truck?" Tommy shook his head, then changed his mind and nodded, then finally just shrugged. "I want to, but what? What if I do something wrong? What if I break something?" Marcus smiled gently, recognizing the anxiety that so many children carried but rarely expressed. "You know what? In all my years as a firefighter, I've never seen a kid break anything by sitting in a truck. And even if something did break, we'd fix it together. That's what we do. We fix things." Tommy looked up at the captain, really looked at him, and saw something that reminded him of his father, not the physical features, but the warmth, the patience, the willingness to take time for a child who felt invisible. "My dad died," Tommy said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "He wasn't a firefighter, but I think he would have been a good one." Marcus felt his heart clench. He had seen a lot in his career. Tragedy and triumph, loss and recovery, but there was something about children's grief that never got easier to witness. "I'm sure he would have been, and I bet he's really proud of the brave young man you're becoming." Tommy's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and nodded. Can I sit in the truck now?" "Absolutely. Come on, I'll give you the VIP tour." For the next 20 minutes, Captain Williams showed Tommy every inch of the fire truck, explaining each piece of equipment, each dial and lever and compartment. He let Tommy wear his helmet, took a photo on the school's camera to send home with him, and answered every question with patience and enthusiasm. When it was time for the firefighters to leave, Tommy ran back to Captain Williams with something clutched in his small hand. "This is for you," Tommy said, holding out a crayon drawing. It showed a fire truck with stick figures standing beside it, one smaller than the others. Above the scene, Tommy had written in his careful, wobbly handwriting, "Thank you for being heroes." Marcus accepted the drawing with the same reverence he would have given a Medal of Honor. "This is the best gift I've ever received," he said, and he meant it. "I'm going to hang this up in my office where I can see it every day." Tommy beamed, and for a moment the weight he carried seemed to lift from his shoulders. That evening, Sarah Mitchell listened as her son talked non-stop about the firefighters, about Captain Williams and the fire truck and the helmet that was too big for his head. It was the most animated she had seen him in months, and she felt tears prick her eyes at the simple joy in his voice. "And Captain Williams said I could visit the fire station sometime if you say it's okay," Tommy said, bouncing on his bed as Sarah tucked him in. "Can I, Mom, please? We'll see, sweetheart. Maybe on a Saturday when they're not too busy." Biscuit jumped onto the bed, curling up at Tommy's feet as he always did, and Tommy's hand automatically found the dog's fur. "I told Captain Williams about Dad," he said, his voice growing quieter. "I hope that was okay." Sarah smoothed the hair back from his forehead, her heart full and aching at the same time. "Of course it was okay. Your dad would have loved those firefighters. He always admired people who helped others." As she turned off the light and closed the door, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe Tommy was finding his way through the grief that had shadowed their lives for so long. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. The old Harrison house sat at the end of Willow Lane, a Victorian-era structure that had been empty for nearly a decade. Once, it had been the grandest home in Cedar Falls, built by the town's founder and passed down through generations of his descendants. But the last Harrison had died without heirs, and the house had fallen into disrepair, its windows dark, its garden overgrown, its once proud facade slowly surrendering to time and neglect. Local children whispered stories about the Harrison house, daring each other to approach its sagging porch, to peer through its dusty windows, to touch its peeling paint. It was a rite of passage in Cedar Falls, a test of courage that had been passed down through generations of young residents. Tommy had never been particularly interested in the Harrison house. He preferred exploring the woods behind his home, building forts with Biscuit, collecting interesting rocks and leaves to add to his ever-growing collection. But on that fateful Saturday morning, 3 days after the fire safety assembly, everything changed. It started, as so many disasters do, with a simple accident. Sarah had a job interview in the neighboring town of Riverside, the first promising opportunity she'd had in months. The position was for an administrative assistant at a medical clinic, with good hours, decent pay, and the possibility of advancement. It could be the fresh start they needed. "Are you sure you'll be okay staying with Mrs. Henderson for a few hours?" Sarah asked, straightening Tommy's collar even though it didn't need straightening. "I can try to reschedule if you'd rather come with me." "I'll be fine, Mom," Tommy said, though the truth was he would have preferred to stay home alone. He was 7 now, practically grown up, and Mrs. Henderson always smelled like mothballs and made him eat oatmeal cookies that were more raisin than cookie. "Remember, stay in Mrs. Henderson's yard. Don't go wandering off. And keep Biscuit on his leash if you take him outside." Tommy nodded, only half listening as he watched Biscuit chase his own tail in circles. His mother kissed his forehead, gathered her purse and her carefully prepared resume, and headed out the door, with one last worried glance over her shoulder. Mrs. Henderson was a kind woman in her 70s, a widow who had lived in Cedar Falls her entire life and knew everyone's business, often before they knew it themselves. She welcomed Tommy with the expected mothball scent and a plate of raisin-heavy cookies, then settled into her recliner to watch her afternoon game shows while Tommy sat on the floor with Biscuit, building towers out of old magazines. It was during a commercial break that disaster struck. Biscuit, who had been dozing peacefully at Tommy's side, suddenly lifted his head, his ears perking forward. A squirrel had appeared on the windowsill, its bushy tail twitching as it surveyed the room with beady black eyes. Before Tommy could react, Biscuit was on his feet, barking frantically at the intruder. "Biscuit, no!" Tommy lunged for the dog, but Biscuit was too fast. He darted toward the window just as Mrs. Henderson was getting up to see what the commotion was about. In the chaos, no one noticed that the front door hadn't latched properly when Tommy arrived. Biscuit squeezed through the gap and was gone. Tommy's heart stopped. For one terrible moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then pure instinct took over, and he was out the door before Mrs. Henderson could even process what had happened. "Biscuit! Biscuit, come back!" But Biscuit was chasing the squirrel with single-minded determination, his small body a blur of brown and white as he tore down the sidewalk, across Mrs. Fernandez's perfectly manicured lawn, and toward the end of Willow Lane, where the Harrison house waited like a dark reminder of things forgotten. Tommy ran faster than he had ever run in his life, his sneakers pounding against the pavement, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could see Biscuit up ahead, could see the squirrel leading him on a merry chase through yards and under fences. And then, to Tommy's horror, he saw Biscuit disappear through a gap in the broken fence surrounding the Harrison house. "No, no, no," Tommy whispered, skidding to a stop in front of the ancient property. The house loomed above him, 3 stories of weathered wood and broken windows, its angles somehow wrong, its shadows somehow deeper than they should have been in the afternoon sunlight. Tommy could hear Biscuit barking somewhere inside. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to find an adult, to do anything other than enter that house. But Biscuit was in there, his best friend, his companion through the loneliest nights and the hardest days. Tommy couldn't abandon him. He wouldn't. With a courage that surprised even himself, Tommy squeezed through the gap in the fence and approached the house's back door. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, in his ears, in every inch of his small body. The rational part of his mind, the part that remembered all the warnings from his mother, from Mrs. Henderson, from Captain Williams at the school assembly, screamed at him to turn back. But Biscuit was in there. His Biscuit, the dog who had slept at his feet every night since his father died. The dog who had licked away his tears when the nightmares came. The dog who was his best friend in the entire world. Tommy couldn't turn back. He wouldn't. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, and Tommy pushed it open with shaking hands. The smell hit him first, dust and mold and something else, something sharp and unpleasant that made his eyes water. But he could still hear Biscuit barking somewhere above him, and that sound drove him forward. Each bark was like a beacon, calling him deeper into the darkness, promising that if he was just brave enough, he would find what he was looking for. "Biscuit, where are you, boy? I'm coming!" The interior of the Harrison house was worse than anything Tommy had imagined. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing water-stained plaster beneath. Furniture lay overturned and broken, covered in decades of dust. The floorboards creaked ominously with every step, and Tommy could see daylight through gaps where the wood had rotted away. Cobwebs hung from every corner, thick and grey, and something scuttled in the darkness that Tommy chose not to think about. He followed the sound of barking up a grand staircase, clinging to a banister that wobbled dangerously under his weight. On the second floor, the damage was even more severe. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, leaving a hole through which Tommy could see the sky. Rain had gotten in over the years, warping the floors and creating treacherous soft spots that groaned under his feet. "Biscuit, are you up here?" A bark answered him, coming from somewhere above. The 3rd floor. Tommy's stomach churned with fear, but he pressed on, climbing a narrower staircase to the top of the house. He found Biscuit in what had once been a children's nursery, his leash tangled around the leg of an old wooden rocking horse. The squirrel was gone, escaped through a broken window, but Biscuit was trapped, whimpering now as he strained against the leash. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here. I'm going to get you out." Tommy crossed the room carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. He was almost to Biscuit when he heard it, a crack loud and sharp like a branch breaking in a storm. And then the floor gave way beneath him. Tommy screamed as he plummeted through rotted wood, crashing through the ceiling of the 2nd floor and landing hard on a pile of debris that had accumulated below. Pain shot through his ankle, and dust filled his lungs, making him cough and gag. Above him, Biscuit was barking frantically, but Tommy couldn't see him anymore. Couldn't see much of anything through the tears streaming down his face and the dust clouding the air. "Help," he whispered, though there was no one to hear. "Somebody help me." Back at Mrs. Henderson's house, the elderly woman had called 911 the moment she realized Tommy was gone. Within minutes, the Cedar Falls Police Department had dispatched officers to search the neighborhood, and Mrs. Henderson had called Sarah Mitchell with the news that would shatter her world. Sarah was just finishing her interview when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, saw Mrs. Henderson's name, and felt her blood turn to ice. Mrs. Henderson never called. She was from a generation that believed phones were for emergencies only. "Hello? Sarah, dear, I'm so sorry. Tommy ran off after Biscuit, and I couldn't catch him. The police are looking, but—" Sarah didn't hear the rest. She was already running toward her car, the interview forgotten, the job forgotten, everything forgotten except her son, her baby, her reason for living. At the fire station, the call came in at 3:47 p.m. "All units, we have a report of a child possibly trapped in the abandoned Harrison house on Willow Lane. Neighbors report hearing screaming from inside the structure. Building is considered unstable and hazardous." Captain Williams was on his feet before the dispatcher finished speaking. "Everyone gear up. Johnson, Rodriguez, Torres, you're with me. Move." The firefighters sprang into action with the practiced efficiency of 1,000 drills. Within 3 minutes, Engine 7 was rolling out of the station, sirens wailing, lights flashing. Marcus was in the passenger seat, radio in hand, coordinating with police and emergency medical services. "Do we have a positive ID on the child?" he asked. "Negative, Captain. But we've got a woman at the scene claiming it's her son. Name is Sarah Mitchell." Marcus felt his heart lurch. He remembered the boy from the school assembly, the one with the sad eyes who had told him about his father. He remembered the drawing that now hung on his office wall, the crooked letters spelling out, "Thank you for being heroes. Tell them we're 2 minutes out. And get me everything we have on that structure." The Harrison house was every firefighter's nightmare. Old construction, unknown hazards, possible structural collapse. The department had cited it for demolition years ago, but bureaucratic delays and legal disputes over the estate had kept it standing, a ticking time bomb, waiting to claim a victim. When Engine 7 pulled up to the scene, Sarah Mitchell broke through the police line and ran toward them, her face streaked with tears. Her interview clothes were rumpled now, her careful makeup ruined by the tears that hadn't stopped flowing since she received Mrs. Henderson's call. The 30-minute drive from Riverside had been the longest of her life. Every red light an eternity, every mile an agonizing reminder of how far away she was from her son. "My son is in there. Please, you have to help him. He's only 7 years old." Marcus caught her by the shoulders, steadying her with firm but gentle hands. He could feel her trembling, could see the terror in her eyes that only a parent can know. The primal fear of losing a child, of failing to protect the person you love most in the world. "Mom, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Where was your son last seen?" "I wasn't here. Mrs. Henderson was watching him. She said Biscuit got out and Tommy chased him. The dog ran into the house and Tommy must have followed." Sarah's voice broke on a sob, her words tumbling over each other in her desperation to make him understand. "He's 7 years old. He's just a baby. He lost his father 3 years ago, and I can't lose him too. Please, please help him." Marcus met her eyes, and in that moment a bond formed between two people united by a shared mission to bring a little boy home safely. He saw his own children in her desperate plea, felt the weight of every parent's worst nightmare pressing down on his shoulders. "We're going to get your son, Mrs. Mitchell. I promise you. We're going to bring him home." Jake Johnson had already begun a reconnaissance of the exterior, looking for potential entry points and assessing the visible damage. What he saw made his stomach turn. The structure was compromised in multiple places, with entire sections of the roof caved in and walls leaning at angles that defied gravity. "Captain, this place is a death trap," Jake reported. "I don't even know if it'll hold our weight." "Then we go in light and fast," Marcus replied. "Rodriguez, Torres, you're on backup. Set up the ladders and prepare for extraction. Johnson, you're with me." Maria nodded sharply, already directing Ben toward the truck for equipment. She had learned to trust Marcus's judgment over years of working together, but she couldn't help the worry that knotted her stomach as she watched him and Jake approach the house. Inside the Harrison house, Tommy had managed to pull himself into a sitting position against a fallen beam. His ankles screamed with pain. definitely sprained, possibly broken, and he could feel blood trickling down his forehead where debris had cut him during the fall. But worst of all was the silence from above. Biscuit had stopped barking. "Biscuit!" Tommy called, his voice hoarse. "Are you okay, boy?" A small whimper answered him, and Tommy felt tears of relief stream down his face. Biscuit was alive. Scared, trapped, but alive. "It's okay, buddy. Someone's going to come. Someone's going to help us." As if in answer to his prayer, Tommy heard voices outside, shouting, the wail of sirens. And then, cutting through all of it, a voice he recognized. "Cedar Falls Fire Department. Can anyone hear me?" "I'm here," Tommy screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm in here. Please help." "My dog is upstairs." Marcus heard the cry and felt a surge of relief. The child was conscious, coherent, and able to communicate. That was a good sign. "We hear you, buddy. We're coming to get you. Can you tell me where you are?" "I fell through the floor. I'm on the second floor now, I think. But Biscuit is still up higher. You have to get him too, please." "He's my best friend." Jake glanced at Marcus, a question in his eyes. Standard protocol was clear. Human life first. Always. Animals, no matter how beloved, were secondary. But Marcus remembered the boy's face at the school assembly, the way he had clutched that crayon drawing like it was the most precious thing in the world. He remembered what Tommy had told him about his father, about the dreams he was too afraid to have, about the loneliness that no 7-year-old should have to carry. "We'll get both of you out," Marcus called back. "I promise. Now I need you to stay very still and keep talking to me. What's your name?" "Tommy. Tommy Mitchell." "Okay, Tommy. I'm Captain Williams. We met at your school, remember? You gave me a drawing." Through his pain and fear, Tommy felt a spark of hope. "You said you'd hang it in your office." "And I did. It's there right now, watching over all of us. So here's what we're going to do, Tommy. My friend Jake and I are going to come in and get you, but the floor isn't safe, so we need to be very careful. Can you be brave for me?" "I can try. That's all I'm asking." Marcus and Jake entered the house through the back door, testing each step, moving with painstaking care. The structure groaned around them, a living thing protesting their intrusion. Dust rained down from above, and somewhere in the walls, timbers creaked with the strain of holding together a house that wanted desperately to fall. The smell was overwhelming, decades of decay, mold, rotting wood, and something else, something acrid that made their eyes water even through their protective gear. "Watch that board," Jake muttered, pointing to a section of floor that had already begun to sag. "Looks like it's ready to go." They navigated around the hazard, their boots finding the more solid sections near the walls, where the support beams offered some stability. Every step was a calculated risk, every breath a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. They found Tommy huddled against the beam, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. His leg was extended at an awkward angle, and Marcus could see immediately that the ankle was badly injured. But the boy's eyes were clear, and he managed a weak smile when he saw the firefighters approaching. Despite the pain etched across his features, there was something else there too, relief, hope, the desperate gratitude of someone who had begun to fear they might never be found. "You came," Tommy whispered. "Of course we came." Marcus knelt beside him, quickly assessing his injuries while Jake secured the area. "Can you move your fingers and toes for me, Tommy?" Tommy wiggled his fingers, but when he tried to move his toes, he winced in pain. "My ankle hurts really bad." "I know, buddy. We're going to get you out of here and let the doctors take a look at it. But first, I need to ask you something important." Marcus leaned in close, his voice gentle but serious. "Biscuit is upstairs, right?" Tommy nodded frantically. "He's in the room with the rocking horse. His leash got tangled. You have to get him, Captain Williams. You have to. He's all I have left of my dad." Marcus's heart clenched. He understood now, in a way that went beyond words, why this boy would risk his life to save a dog. Biscuit wasn't just a pet. He was a connection to a father Tommy had lost, a living memory of better times, a promise that love endured even after death. In that moment, Marcus thought of his own children, of the things they held onto when the world felt uncertain and scary. He thought of his father's old fire helmet, which still sat on a shelf in his garage, worn and cracked, but more precious to him than anything money could buy. "Jake, I need you to get Tommy to safety. I'm going up for the dog." Jake's eyes widened, disbelief and concern warring across his features. "Captain, the structure up there is completely compromised. The whole thing could come down any second. It's suicide. Then I'll be careful, but I'm not leaving that dog up there to die. Not when that boy's been through so much already." "Marcus, that's an order, Lieutenant. Get the boy out." "I'll get the dog." Jake hesitated, torn between duty and friendship, between following orders and protecting the man who had become like a father to him since he joined the department. But Marcus's eyes brooked no argument, and Jake finally nodded, accepting the decision even as every instinct screamed against it. "Don't you dare die on us, old man. I mean it. We've got a poker game scheduled for next week, and you still owe me $20. Wouldn't dream of it. Now move." Jake carefully lifted Tommy into his arms, cradling the boy against his chest as he began the treacherous journey back through the house. Tommy clung to him, but his eyes never left Captain Williams as he began climbing the stairs toward the 3rd floor. "Be careful," Tommy called. "Biscuit is scared. He might try to run away." "I'll be gentle," Marcus promised. "Dogs and I have an understanding." The 3rd floor stairs were worse than Marcus had feared. 2 of the steps were completely missing, and the others felt like they might crumble at any moment. He ascended slowly, distributing his weight as evenly as possible, one hand on the wall for balance. When he reached the top, he found himself in a hallway lined with doors, most of them hanging open or missing entirely. At the end, through a doorway that had lost its door decades ago, he could see the nursery Tommy had described. And there, tangled in his leash and shaking with fear, was Biscuit. "Hey there, little guy," Marcus said softly, approaching with slow, deliberate movements. "You've gotten yourself into quite a mess, haven't you?" Biscuit whimpered, his tail giving a tentative wag despite his terror. The dog could sense that this human was here to help, not hurt, and some of the tension drained from his small body. Marcus reached the rocking horse and began working on the tangled leash. It was wound around the leg multiple times, pulled tight by Biscuit's struggles to escape. As Marcus worked, the floor beneath him groaned ominously. "Just hold on," he muttered, as much to himself as to the dog. Almost there. The leash finally came free, and Marcus scooped Biscuit into his arms. The dog immediately burrowed against his chest, trembling but safe. Marcus allowed himself one moment of relief before turning back toward the stairs. He made it 3 steps before the floor gave way. Outside, Jake had just emerged from the house with Tommy when they heard the crash. Sarah screamed, and Tommy's face went white. "Captain Williams!" Jake shouted. "Marcus!" For a terrible moment, there was silence. Then from somewhere inside the crumbling structure, a voice called out, "I'm okay, I'm okay." Floor collapsed, but I caught myself on a beam. "I've got the dog." Relief flooded through Jake, followed immediately by renewed fear. "Can you get out?" "Negative. I'm going to need an assist. The stairs are gone." Maria was already moving, assessing the exterior for extraction points. "There's a window on the 2nd floor, north side. If we can get a ladder up there, we might be able to reach him." "Do it," Jake ordered, taking command in Marcus's absence. "Torres, get that ladder up. Rodriguez, I need you on the aerial platform. We're pulling him out through the window." Inside, Marcus clung to a wooden beam that had somehow remained anchored to the wall while everything around it disintegrated. His arms burned with the effort of holding himself and Biscuit above a drop that would almost certainly be fatal, but he didn't let go. Couldn't let go. Not when a little boy was counting on him to keep his promise. "You're a good dog, Biscuit," Marcus grunted, adjusting his grip. "Has anyone ever told you that? A really good dog who doesn't deserve to die in this godforsaken house." Biscuit licked his chin, which Marcus chose to interpret as agreement. The next few minutes felt like hours. Marcus could hear his team working outside, could hear Maria shouting commands and Ben responding. He focused on that, on the sounds of competent people doing their jobs, on the knowledge that he wasn't alone. And then, through the broken window, Maria appeared. "Hey, Captain," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Fancy meeting you here. Rodriguez, nice of you to drop by. You know me, never miss a party." She extended her hand. "Pass me the dog first, then I'll get you." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to hold on to Biscuit to ensure the dog's safety personally. But Maria was right. The transfer would be easier with both his hands free. Carefully, he handed Biscuit to Maria, who tucked the small dog securely inside her jacket. Then she reached for Marcus, grabbing his arm with a grip that was stronger than it looked. "On three," she said. "1, 2, 3. Marcus swung toward the window, his feet finding purchase on the exterior wall as Maria pulled him through. The beam he had been clinging to gave way behind him, crashing through what remained of the floor and disappearing into the darkness below. "That was too close," Maria breathed as they descended the ladder together. "Agreed," Marcus said. "Next time I volunteer to rescue a pet from a death trap, remind me I'm too old for this." "You're not old, just stubborn." When they reached the ground, Marcus found himself immediately engulfed in a collision of small arms and desperate sobs. Tommy had broken away from the paramedics who were trying to treat his ankle and limped across the yard to throw himself at the captain. "You got him!" Tommy cried. "You got Biscuit!" Marcus knelt down, ignoring the protests of his exhausted muscles, and gently placed Biscuit in Tommy's arms. The dog's tail was wagging so hard his entire body shook, and he covered Tommy's face in kisses that made the boy laugh through his tears. "I made you a promise," Marcus said. "Firefighters always keep their promises." Sarah Mitchell pushed through the crowd of emergency responders and fell to her knees beside her son. She pulled Tommy into an embrace that tried to communicate everything words couldn't. The terror of thinking she had lost him, the relief of seeing him alive, the love that was bigger than any fear. "I'm sorry, Mom," Tommy sobbed into her shoulder. "I'm sorry I went into the house. I just couldn't leave Biscuit." "Shh, baby, it's okay. You're safe. That's all that matters." Marcus stood back and watched the reunion, feeling the weight of the day settling onto his shoulders. This was why he did the job. Not for the glory or the recognition, but for moments like this, when families were made whole again, when children were returned to their parents, when dogs were reunited with their boys. The crowd that had gathered during the rescue began to applaud. It started slowly, a few neighbors clapping their hands together, but it quickly spread until the entire street was alive with cheering and whistling and shouts of gratitude. Marcus raised his hand in acknowledgement, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. People needed to believe in heroes. They needed to see that when disaster struck, there were people who would run toward the danger instead of away from it. In a town struggling with economic hardship and uncertain futures, that belief was more valuable than gold. The news spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew about the rescue at the Harrison house, how a 7-year-old boy had risked everything for his dog, and how a fire captain had risked everything for both of them. Local reporters appeared, their cameras capturing images of Marcus and his team, of Tommy and Biscuit, of a community united by shared relief and gratitude. But it was what happened next that would truly transform Cedar Falls. The story was picked up by a regional news station, then a national one. Within 48 hours, the boy, the dog, and the hero was trending across social media platforms. People who had never heard of Cedar Falls were sharing videos of Tommy hugging Biscuit, of Marcus emerging from the window with the dog in his arms, of the crowd erupting in applause. And with the attention came questions. Questions about the abandoned Harrison house and why it had been allowed to remain standing. questions about the fire department and whether it had the resources it needed to respond to emergencies, questions about a small town's struggle to survive in a changing economy. A week after the rescue, Marcus received a phone call that would change everything. "Captain Williams, this is Robert Prescott from the Prescott Foundation. I saw the news story about your rescue, and I'd like to discuss a significant donation to your fire department. Would you be available to meet?" The Prescott Foundation was a national charitable organization funded by the late billionaire Henry Prescott, who had made his fortune in manufacturing before dedicating his final years to philanthropy. Robert Prescott, his grandson, now ran the foundation and had a reputation for supporting causes that demonstrated both courage and community spirit. Marcus agreed to the meeting, though he refused to get his hopes up. He had learned long ago that promises and phone calls didn't always translate into results, but Robert Prescott was different. He arrived in Cedar Falls 3 days later, a man in his 50s with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He spent the morning touring the fire station, meeting the crew, and asking thoughtful questions about their equipment, their training, and their challenges. He listened more than he talked, which Marcus found refreshing in a world full of people who seemed to believe they had all the answers. After the tour, Robert asked to meet Tommy Mitchell. Sarah was hesitant at first, protective of her son after everything he had been through, but Robert was patient and understanding. He explained that he simply wanted to thank the boy, whose courage had inspired so many people. They met at the Mitchell home, in the small living room where family photos lined the walls, and Biscuit dozed on his favorite spot by the window. Tommy, his ankle now in a cast that his classmates had covered with colorful signatures, sat between his mother and Captain Williams, unsure what to make of this important stranger who had come to visit. "Tommy," Robert said, sitting across from the boy with genuine warmth in his voice, "I wanted to thank you personally. Your bravery inspired millions of people who saw your story. And it reminded me why my grandfather started the Prescott Foundation in the first place." Tommy blinked, confused. "I wasn't brave. I was scared the whole time." Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right, even when you are scared. That's the hardest kind of courage there is. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I have something for your town. It's a donation to the Cedar Falls Fire Department, enough to cover new equipment, additional training, and expanded staffing for the next 5 years. Marcus, who had been warned about the donation, still felt his breath catch when Robert named the amount. It was more money than the department's annual budget. More than they could have hoped for in their wildest dreams. But that's not all, Robert continued. The foundation would also like to establish a scholarship fund for young people in Cedar Falls who want to pursue careers in emergency services. We're calling it the Tommy Mitchell Courage Scholarship. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Tommy looked at his mother, then at Captain Williams, then back at Robert, trying to process what he was hearing. "Me?" he whispered. "They're naming something after me?" "After you," Robert confirmed. "Because you showed the world what it means to love something so much that you'd face your fears to protect it. That's a lesson everyone needs to learn." The donation was announced at a town hall meeting the following week. Mayor Angela Rodriguez, no relation to Maria, though they joked about being long-lost cousins, stood at the podium and read the details, while the citizens of Cedar Falls listened in stunned silence. When she finished, the room erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very walls of the old community center. People were hugging, crying, laughing, emotions that had been suppressed for months under the weight of economic uncertainty now flooding out in a cathartic release. Old Mrs. Fernandez, who had lived in Cedar Falls for 83 years and had seen the town through wars, recessions, and countless changes, stood up from her seat in the front row. Her voice, though wavering with age, carried clearly through the room. "I've seen a lot in my time," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, "but I've never seen anything quite like this. That little boy reminded us all what matters. Family, community, love. We'd forgotten, I think. We'd gotten so caught up in our troubles that we forgot who we are. The room fell silent. Every eye on the elderly woman who had watched generations of Cedar Falls residents grow up, raise families, and pass on. "We are Cedar Falls," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "We take care of our own. We always have. And thanks to that brave little boy and his dog, we always will." The applause that followed was even louder than before, and Mayor Rodriguez had to wait several minutes before she could continue with the meeting. But the real surprise came at the end of the meeting when Captain Williams approached the microphone. "I've been a firefighter for 27 years, Marcus began, his deep voice filling the room. "I've seen a lot of things, some good, some bad, some that still keep me up at night. But what I saw last week in that old house on Willow Lane was something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "A 7-year-old boy taught me something that day. He taught me that love doesn't care about risk assessments or probability calculations or strategic planning. Love does what needs to be done, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when the whole world is telling you to turn back." Marcus looked at Tommy, who was sitting in the front row with Sarah and Biscuit. "Tommy, you didn't just save your dog that day. You reminded all of us what matters. And as long as I'm captain of this fire department, we're going to remember that lesson. We're going to serve this community with the same kind of heart that you showed, because that's what Cedar Falls deserves." The applause that followed was the loudest of the evening, and Marcus had to wait several minutes before he could continue. "There's one more thing I'd like to announce. As you all know, the old Harrison house has been a hazard for too long. Thanks to the Prescott Foundation's generosity, we finally have the resources to address it. But instead of just demolishing the site, we're going to build something there. Something that will honor the past while building toward the future." He unveiled an architectural rendering that had been prepared in secret over the past week. The Harrison Memorial Park and Youth Center, a place where kids can play, learn, and grow, where families can gather, where the community can come together. It will include a junior firefighter program, teaching young people about emergency services and giving them a path toward careers that serve others. The rendering showed a beautiful park space with walking paths, a playground, and a modern building that somehow managed to echo the Victorian architecture of the original Harrison house without replicating it. In the center of the park, there was a statue of a boy and his dog, forever captured in bronze, a permanent reminder of the day that changed everything. Tommy stared at the image with wide eyes. Is that supposed to be me and Biscuit?" "If you and your mom approve," Marcus said. "We wanted to ask your permission first." Tommy looked at his mother, who had tears streaming down her face, but was smiling wider than he had seen in years. "Can we, Mom? Can they make a statue of us?" Sarah laughed through her tears and hugged her son close. "I think your dad would have loved that. I think he would have been so proud of you." The following month saw Cedar Falls transformed in ways that went beyond bricks and mortar. The fire department, newly flush with funding, hired 3 additional firefighters and updated equipment that had been on its last legs for years. Jake Johnson was promoted to assistant captain, a position he had earned through years of dedication and a moment of leadership during the Harrison House rescue. Maria Rodriguez received an award for bravery from the County Fire Association, and Ben Torres decided to pursue specialized training in technical rescue, inspired by what he had witnessed. The Harrison Memorial Park and Youth Center broke ground in spring, with a ceremony attended by what seemed like the entire town. Tommy Mitchell was given a gold-plated shovel to turn the first patch of earth, with Biscuit by his side and Captain Williams standing just behind him. The photograph made the front page of newspapers across the state. But perhaps the most significant change was one that couldn't be captured in headlines or photographs. Cedar Falls had found its soul again. The sense of community that had been fraying under economic pressure began to knit itself back together. Neighbors helped neighbors. Businesses cooperated instead of competed. The local factory's closure, which had seemed like a death sentence just months earlier, became an opportunity for reinvention. New small businesses opened, many of them started by young people who had been inspired by the town's renewal. The Tommy Mitchell Courage Scholarship awarded its first grants to 3 Cedar Falls High School seniors who were pursuing degrees in emergency services. One of them, a quiet girl named Isabella Santos, would eventually become the first female fire chief in Cedar Falls history, but that was a story still waiting to be written. For Tommy himself, life gradually returned to normal, or as normal as life could be for a second grader who had become a local celebrity. He still walked to school with Biscuit trotting beside him. He still did his homework at the kitchen table while his mother cooked dinner. He still visited Captain Williams at the fire station on Saturday mornings, though now his visits were official. He was the first member of the Junior Firefighter Club, earning badges and learning skills that might one day save lives. His nightmares became less frequent, not because the world had become less scary, but because Tommy had learned something important about fear. He had learned that you could be terrified and still move forward. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important. On the 1-year anniversary of the rescue, the town held a celebration in the newly completed Harrison Memorial Park. The statue of Tommy and Biscuit had been unveiled the month before, and it had already become a favorite spot for photographs and quiet contemplation. Families spread blankets on the grass. Children played on the new playground equipment. The smell of barbecue drifted from grills manned by volunteer firefighters. Tommy stood before the statue, looking up at his bronze likeness with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The sculptor had captured something true in the piece: the determination in the boy's eyes, the loyalty in the dog's posture, the unbreakable bond between them. "It's weird, right?" said Emma Chen, who had remained Tommy's best friend through everything. "Having a statue of yourself? Super weird," Tommy agreed, "but also kind of cool." "Definitely kind of cool." Captain Williams approached, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to Tommy and one to Emma, then turned to admire the statue himself. "You know what I like best about this," Marcus said. "It's not the statue, it's what it represents. This whole park, this whole celebration, it's not really about one rescue. It's about a community that remembered how to hope." Tommy considered this, his young mind working through concepts that many adults struggled to articulate. "Is that why you became a firefighter? To help people hope?" Marcus smiled, the expression deepening the lines around his eyes in a way that spoke of years lived fully. "I became a firefighter because my dad was one, and his dad before him. But I stayed a firefighter because of moments like these, because every once in a while you get to be part of something that matters. You get to see the best of what people can be." "Do you think I could be a firefighter someday?" "Tommy, I think you could be anything you want to be. But if you decide to become a firefighter, there will always be a place for you at Station 7. That's a promise. And firefighters always keep their promises. Always." Sarah Mitchell watched from a distance as her son talked with the captain, feeling a peace she hadn't known in years. David would have loved this: the park, the community, the way their son had grown into someone so brave and kind. She could almost feel her husband's presence, not as a ghost or a spirit, but as a lingering warmth, an assurance that love didn't end with death. Biscuit sat beside her, his grey muzzle resting on his paws. He was getting older now, moving a little slower, sleeping a little longer. But his eyes were still bright with intelligence and devotion, and his tail still wagged whenever Tommy called his name. "You're a good dog, Biscuit," Sarah murmured, echoing the words she had heard Marcus say in countless retellings of the rescue. "The best dog in the whole world." Biscuit's tail thumped against the grass in agreement. As the sun began to set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, the citizens of the town gathered for one final event. The fire department was dedicating a new memorial wall at the station, honoring all the firefighters who had served Cedar Falls over the decades. Among the names and photographs was a new addition, a plaque bearing the words that Tommy had written on his drawing a year ago. "Thank you for being heroes." The misspelling had been preserved intentionally, a reminder that heroes came in all sizes, all ages, and all levels of spelling ability. Captain Williams stood before the gathered crowd, his team arrayed behind him, and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "In this town we take care of each other. We run toward danger, not away from it. We keep our promises, even when keeping them is hard. And we never, ever forget that the people we serve, every single one of them, is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's best friend." He paused, his eyes finding Tommy in the crowd. "A year ago, a boy asked us to save his little buddy. Our response stopped the whole town in its tracks. But what happened next? The donations, the park, the scholarships, the renewal of hope, that wasn't because of us. That was because of you, all of you, a community that chose to come together instead of falling apart." Marcus raised his hand in salute. "It's been my honor to serve you, and as long as there's breath in my body, I will continue to serve. That's my promise. And firefighters always keep their promises." The crowd finished in unison, the words rising into the evening air like a prayer, like a vow, like the beginning of a new story yet to be told. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and laughter and the kind of simple joy that Cedar Falls had been missing for too long. Children ran through the park, playing tag and hiding behind the statue. Adults rekindled friendships that had been neglected during harder times. Tommy sat on a bench near the playground, Biscuit curled at his feet, watching the celebration with tired but happy eyes. His mother sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders, both of them content to simply be present in this moment of peace. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Dad can see us? Like from heaven or wherever he is?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. She had struggled with faith since David's death, had questioned and doubted, but sitting here, surrounded by evidence of how much good could come from even the darkest moments, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. I think the people we love never really leave us. They become part of who we are. They live in our memories, in our choices, in the way we treat others. So yes, baby, I think Dad can see us, and I think he's smiling." Tommy nodded, satisfied with this answer. He reached down to pet Biscuit, feeling the dog's heartbeat beneath his fingers. "I miss him," Tommy said quietly. "But I'm not as sad as I used to be. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay. That's how it's supposed to work. The sadness doesn't go away completely, but it makes room for other things. Happiness, hope, love. I have a lot of love," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "For you, for Biscuit, for Captain Williams and the firefighters, for Emma, for everyone." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the tears of grief she had shed so many times before. These were tears of gratitude, of pride, of overwhelming love for the small person she had been privileged to raise. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I know, Tommy Mitchell. Don't ever let anyone make you think that's a weakness. It's your greatest strength." That's what Captain Williams says too. He says the world needs more people who lead with their hearts. He's a wise man. He's my friend. Sarah pulled Tommy closer, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Yes, he is. We're very lucky to have friends like him." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies emerge. And somewhere in the darkness, the Harrison Memorial Park waited, a monument to tragedy transformed, to hope renewed. 5 years later, Tommy Mitchell would graduate from Cedar Falls High School as valedictorian. His speech would include these words: "When I was 7 years old, I learned something that I've carried with me ever since. I learned that one moment of courage can change everything. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. We're all connected by our choices, by our love, by our willingness to help each other when times are hard. My dog Biscuit taught me that. Captain Marcus Williams taught me that. This town taught me that. And as I go out into the world, I promise to take that lesson with me. I promise to run toward danger when others run away. To love with my whole heart, even when it's scary. To keep my promises, no matter what. He would pause, looking out at the crowd of family and friends and teachers who had shaped his life. Because firefighters always keep their promises. And thanks to Cedar Falls, I've learned that we can all be firefighters in our own way. We can all be heroes. But all of that was still in the future. In this moment, on this perfect evening in a small town that had found its way back to hope, Tommy Mitchell was simply a boy with a dog, surrounded by people who loved him, looking up at a sky full of stars and believing, truly believing, that anything was possible. And across the park, Captain Marcus Williams stood with his team, watching the celebration with quiet satisfaction. His career was far from over. There would be more fires to fight, more rescues to attempt, more moments of terror and triumph. But he knew, with the certainty that only experience can bring, that this was why he did the job. Not for the glory or the gratitude, but for the chance to make a difference, for the privilege of being part of something bigger than himself. He thought of his father and grandfather, whose legacies he carried forward every day. He thought of Tommy, whose courage had inspired a town. He thought of all the firefighters, past and present, who had answered the call when their communities needed them most. "Captain?" Jake Johnson appeared at his elbow, holding 2 bottles of water. "You doing okay?" Marcus accepted the water with a grateful nod. Yeah, I'm doing okay, just thinking." "About what?" "About how one scared kid and his dog managed to save an entire town." Jake smiled, looking across the park at Tommy and Sarah and Biscuit. "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" "It's more than amazing. It's a reminder." "Of what?" Marcus took a long drink of water before answering. "That the calls we answer aren't just emergencies. They're opportunities, chances to show people what humans are capable of when we put others first, chances to plant seeds that we might never see grow." He gestured at the park, the playground, the memorial wall, the statue gleaming in the light of the setting sun. All of this started because a little boy loved his dog enough to walk into a burning building. And it grew because people chose to believe in something good. That's the real miracle, Jake. Not the rescue, the response. Jake nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The response. Every call we get, every life we touch, it's a stone thrown into water. We never know how far the ripples will spread. But if we throw enough stones, if we keep doing the work, eventually those ripples change the shape of the whole pond. That's pretty philosophical for a guy who claims he just likes driving the truck fast. Marcus laughed, the sound warm and full of life. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to maintain." They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 firefighters at the end of a long journey and the beginning of many more. Behind them, the fire station stood ready, its doors open, its trucks gleaming. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. And all around them, the people of Cedar Falls celebrated a community reborn. The boy had begged the firefighters to save his little buddy. Their response had stopped the whole town in its tracks. But what came next? The love, the hope, the unbreakable bonds forged in crisis. That was the real story. And it was a story that would never truly end, as long as there were people willing to run toward danger, to love without reservation, to keep their promises no matter the cost. In Cedar Falls, Minnesota, they had learned that lesson well, and they would never forget. The years that followed would bring their own challenges, economic downturns, natural disasters, the inevitable losses that come with the passage of time. But Cedar Falls faced each challenge with a resilience forged in the crucible of that September day, when a small boy and his dog reminded an entire community what truly mattered. Captain Marcus Williams would live to see 3 more grandchildren born, each one hearing the story of Tommy and Biscuit from the moment they were old enough to understand. He passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by family and friends, his legacy secured not in monuments or awards, but in the countless lives he had touched. Tommy Mitchell would go on to become one of the most decorated firefighters in the state's history, eventually taking over as captain of the very station where his journey had begun. He would train a new generation of firefighters, passing on not just technical skills, but the values that had been passed to him: courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they led with their hearts. And Biscuit, the scruffy little terrier who had started it all by chasing a squirrel into an abandoned house, lived to the remarkable age of 17. When he finally passed, peacefully and surrounded by love, the entire town mourned. His ashes were scattered in Harrison Memorial Park, beneath the statue that bore his likeness. The story lived on, growing and changing with each telling, inspiring new generations to believe in the impossible and to never underestimate the difference one person or one dog could make. The boy had begged the firefighters to save his little buddy. Their response had stopped the whole town in its tracks, and the ripples of that moment spread outward, touching lives that would never know its source, proving once and for all that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about loving something more than you feared losing it. In Cedar Falls, Minnesota, they understood that truth, and they would carry it forward always. On the 10th anniversary of the rescue, the town held its biggest celebration yet. The Harrison Memorial Park had become the heart of Cedar Falls, a gathering place for festivals and concerts and quiet afternoon picnics. The youth center hosted programs for hundreds of children each year, offering everything from tutoring to sports to arts and crafts. The statue of Tommy and Biscuit had been polished until it gleamed, surrounded by flowers planted by volunteers who came from across the county to pay their respects. Captain Marcus Williams, now 62 years old and contemplating retirement, stood at the podium to deliver the keynote address. His hair had gone completely grey, and his movements were slower than they once had been, but his voice still carried the same authority and warmth that had defined his career. 27 years ago, when I became captain of this department, I thought I knew what heroism looked like. I thought it was about big rescues and dramatic saves, about running into burning buildings and coming out alive. And yes, that's part of it. That's important. He paused, looking out at the crowd that had gathered to honor the anniversary. But I've learned that heroism is also quieter than that. It's a single mother working 2 jobs to provide for her child. It's a neighbor checking on an elderly friend during a heat wave. It's a 7-year-old boy who refused to abandon his dog, even when it meant walking into danger. His eyes found Tommy in the crowd, 17 now, tall and confident, wearing his junior firefighter jacket with pride. Tommy Mitchell taught me that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about loving something or someone more than you love your own comfort, your own safety, your own life. That kind of love is rare, and when you see it, you don't forget it. Marcus took a deep breath, his next words carrying the weight of a decision he had been considering for months. I'm announcing today that I will be retiring at the end of this year, but before I go, I have one final duty to perform. It's my honor to announce that Tommy Mitchell has been accepted into the State Fire Academy, where he will begin his training to become a professional firefighter. The crowd erupted in applause, and Tommy felt his face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Emma Chen, sitting beside him, grabbed his arm and squealed with excitement. His mother wiped tears from her eyes, smiling so wide it looked like it might hurt. But that's not all, Marcus continued when the applause died down. I've made a recommendation to the town council, a recommendation they've unanimously approved. When Tommy completes his training and returns to Cedar Falls, there will be a position waiting for him. A position on engine 7, the same truck that answered the call the day this all began. More applause, louder this time, accompanied by cheers and whistles. Tommy stood on unsteady legs, making his way to the podium where Captain Williams waited with open arms. They embraced. Two firefighters from different generations, their lives intertwined by a shared dedication to service and a bond forged in the most unexpected of circumstances. "I'm proud of you, Tommy," Marcus whispered, low enough that only Tommy could hear. "Your father would be too." Tommy stepped back, his eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You taught me what it means to be brave." "No," Marcus said, smiling. "You came in knowing that already. I just helped you remember." Tommy turned to face the crowd, the microphone suddenly in his hand. He hadn't prepared any remarks, hadn't even known about the announcement, but the words came anyway, rising from somewhere deep inside him. 10 years ago, I was just a scared kid who didn't want to lose his best friend. I didn't think about being brave or being a hero. I just thought about Biscuit and how much he meant to me, and how I couldn't let him go without trying. He looked down at his hands, remembering how small they had been, how they had trembled as he pushed open the door to the Harrison house. "What I've learned since then is that we all have a Biscuit, something or someone we love so much that we'd walk into a falling building to save them. It might be a person or a pet or an idea or a community. Whatever it is, that love is what makes us human. It's what connects us to each other. And when we act on that love, amazing things can happen." He gestured at the park around them, at the playground filled with laughing children, at the youth center humming with activity, at the statue that had become a symbol of hope for an entire town. All of this happened because people chose to love Cedar Falls enough to save it. The firefighters who risked their lives every day, the donors who gave when we needed it most, the neighbors who showed up for each other when times were hard, and yes, one scruffy little dog who chased a squirrel into an abandoned house and changed everything. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and even Biscuit, dozing in Emma's lap, seemed to perk up at the mention of his name. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what this town has given me," Tommy continued. "I'm going to be a firefighter because Captain Williams showed me that serving others is the highest calling there is. But more than that, I'm going to be someone who leads with his heart, who runs toward danger when others run away, who keeps his promises no matter what." He raised his hand in the salute that Captain Williams had taught him years ago. "Because firefighters always keep their promises. And this is mine." The applause that followed was deafening, and Tommy stood in the center of it, feeling the weight of his commitment and the lightness of his joy. This was his future, laid out before him like a path through a forest, challenging, uncertain, but lit by the hope of all who had walked it before him. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Tommy slipped away to find a quiet moment with Biscuit. The old dog was lying on his favorite spot by the statue, his muzzle gray and his movements stiff with age. He was 14 now, ancient for a terrier mix, and Tommy knew that their time together was growing short, but for this moment they were still together. A boy and his dog, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. "Hey, buddy," Tommy said, settling onto the grass beside Biscuit. "Someday, huh?" Biscuit's tail wagged weakly, and he scooted closer to rest his head on Tommy's knee. "I'm going to be a firefighter, just like I always wanted. And it's all because of you, you know. Because you ran into that house, and I had to go get you." Tommy stroked the dog's fur, feeling the familiar texture beneath his fingers, the warmth of the body that had kept him company through the darkest nights and the brightest days. "I know you can't stay forever, nobody stays forever, but I want you to know that I'll be okay. I've got Mom and Captain Williams and the firefighters. I've got Emma and Michael and all the kids in the junior firefighter program. I've got a whole town full of people who care about me." He leaned down to press his forehead against Biscuit's. "But you'll always be my first best friend, the one who taught me what it means to love something so much you'd do anything for it. and I'll carry that with me everywhere I go. So in a way, you'll never really leave me. You'll be part of every rescue I make, every promise I keep, every life I save." Biscuit licked his face, and Tommy laughed through the tears that had begun to fall. "I love you, Biscuit. Always have. Always will." They sat together as the sun set and the stars emerged, two friends at the end of one story and the beginning of many more. Around them, the celebration continued. Music and laughter and the sounds of a community that had learned to hope again. Years later, Tommy would graduate from the Minnesota State Fire Academy and return to Cedar Falls as a firefighter, completing the circle that had begun with a terrified 7-year-old and his trapped dog. Biscuit would pass away peacefully at 14, surrounded by love until the very end. The town would hold a memorial for him, because in Cedar Falls, they understood that some dogs are more than pets. They are symbols, teachers, and bridges to the people we have lost. The story of the boy and his dog would be told for generations. It would change and adapt with each telling, as all stories do. But its heart would remain the same, a testament to the power of love, the courage of the small, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all. In Cedar Falls, Minnesota, they knew that story by heart, and they would never, ever forget.